A rain-soaked boy walks into a lawyer's office clutching a single, crumpled letter. A letter that will shatter one man's carefully built world and ignite a journey neither of them saw coming. Behind the boy's wide, watchful eyes hides a plea for more than help, a chance to belong, to be saved before it's too late. As the lawyer reads, past love and buried promises resurface, forcing him to choose between comfort and courage. This isn't just a case, it's a call to become a father and to finally come home. The boy walked into the office just before closing, his coat too big and his shoes wet from the rain that had been falling in sheets since noon. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the lobby, the glass door swinging shut behind him, rainwater pooling at his feet. Claire Winters looked up from her desk, one hand still on the phone, the other hovering over a half-eaten salad. The boy couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, skinny, with hair that looked like it hadn't seen a comb in days, and a face set in that careful stillness kids wore when they'd learned the world didn't always wait for them to catch up. She hung up the phone slowly. "Hi there," she said, not moving too fast. "Are you lost?" He shook his head. "Are your parents with you?" He didn't answer, just reached into his coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope, walked to the desk, set it down gently like it might fall apart if handled wrong. Claire glanced at the handwriting, faded, uneven. Just 4 words written in shaky ink to Mr. Jameson Hart. Urgent. She glanced at the boy again. "Do you know what this is?" He nodded once. "It's from my mom. She's sick." Claire's throat tightened. She glanced at the door to the back offices. Jameson was still in, finishing up paperwork for the Bryant case. He'd told her not to let anyone else in. It was Friday, nearly 6, but something about the boy's face made her ignore the rule. "Wait right here," she said gently. She took the envelope, walked down the hall, and knocked twice before pushing the door open. Jameson looked up, startled. "Claire, I said—" "There's a boy here," she said, alone. "He brought this." She handed him the envelope. Jameson read the front. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He stood without a word and followed her back down the hall. The boy was still standing where she'd left him, coat dripping, hands at his sides. Jameson knelt down. "I'm Jameson," he said. "Did your mom tell you to bring this to me?" The boy nodded. "She said to come right after school, before she gets too tired." Jameson opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter written in the same shaky hand. He read it once, then again. When he looked up, his face was pale. "What's your name, son?" "Eli," the boy said. Jameson stood slowly. "Claire, get him some cocoa and a towel." Then he turned back to the boy. "Eli, I'm going to help you now. No matter what. I promise." Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, something else had begun. Something that would unravel everything Jameson Hart thought he knew about justice, about family, about what it really meant to save someone. Jameson read the letter again, once Eli was settled in the side office, wrapped in a thick towel, his cocoa untouched. The boy hadn't spoken since giving his name, just sat quietly, eyes scanning the room like he was cataloging every possible exit. The letter was short, barely 3 paragraphs, written on ruled paper with smudged ink and pressed so hard in places the pen had torn through. Jameson recognized the name at the bottom before he even reached it. Melissa Ray. He hadn't seen her in over a decade. The letter didn't waste time. "Jameson, if you're reading this, it means my boy did what I asked. I didn't know where else to turn. You're the only person I've ever known who didn't look away when things got messy. I'm dying, Jamie, not the kind of dying they can fight. Lungs, both of them. It's too far gone. I don't have weeks, maybe days, maybe hours. There's no one left. Eli doesn't know it yet, but he's about to be alone. Unless you—" The ink trailed off, as if she'd paused too long and then come back to it. "He's mine, but he's better than me. I need someone who can see that, someone who won't break him trying to fix him. Please don't let the system take him. Please remember who we used to be. I know I have no right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Melissa? He folded the letter slowly. Claire was standing in the hallway, hands wrapped around a second mug of cocoa she hadn't delivered yet. Her face was pale. Do you know her? She asked. Jameson nodded. Old friend? He didn't answer at first, then quietly, old everything. He walked back into the room and sat across from the boy, who looked up warily, one hand still gripping the armrest like he expected to be told to leave. Eli, Jameson said, keeping his voice even, how long has your mom been sick? Eli shrugged. A while. She doesn't go out much anymore. Who's been taking care of you? I do. You cook? Sometimes. We eat soup a lot, or cereal. She keeps crackers under the bed. Jameson's jaw tightened. Where are you staying now? Eli looked down. The apartment. But the heat's off. I think we have 3 more days. Jameson leaned back. Do you know why your mom sent you to me? Eli hesitated. She said, you were like family. Before. Jameson felt the old ache flare in his chest. He hadn't thought about Melissa in years. Not since they'd stood on opposite sides of a courtroom, she as a witness, he as a prosecutor. Both of them pretending they didn't share 1,000 childhood memories. She'd disappeared after that. Word was she'd gotten clean. Then that she hadn't. Then that she'd had a baby. He hadn't known what was true and what wasn't. Now the truth sat across from him, 7 years old, damp sneakers and all. He stood. Come with me. He led Eli to a guest room upstairs, the one usually used for clients from out of town who needed to crash between hearings. It had a clean bed, a small TV, a stack of books on the nightstand. Eli looked around like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to touch anything. You can sleep here tonight, Jameson said. Tomorrow we'll go see your mom. Then we'll figure out the rest. Eli didn't ask questions. He just climbed onto the bed, curled into himself, and closed his eyes. Jameson turned off the light and stood in the hallway for a long time after, staring at the closed door. Melissa Ray. Her name had been a ghost in his mind for years. A half-finished sentence, a song he'd never quite stopped humming. And now her son was asleep in his house, and she was dying, and he had no idea what came next. But he knew one thing, he wouldn't let Eli disappear into the system, not like so many others had. Melissa had asked him to see the boy, and now that he had, he couldn't unsee him. Jameson didn't sleep that night, not really. He lay on the couch downstairs, one arm behind his head, Melissa's letter resting on his chest, like it weighed more than paper should. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, 18, barefoot on the front steps of his parents' house, legs crossed, reading a book she'd borrowed and never returned. He heard her laugh, low and husky, saw her eyes flash when she was angry, soft when she was sad. And he remembered the last time they spoke, the trial, the way she wouldn't look at him as she answered the defense attorney's questions, the way she disappeared before he could ask why she'd lied on the stand. He had hated her for a long time. He had loved her longer. At 5:30 a.m., he got up and made coffee. He stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky turn gray, then blue. When Claire arrived at 7, she found him already dressed, coat on, keys in hand. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Hospital," he said. "Find out how much time she really has." "What about the boy?" "He's coming with me." Eli was already awake, sitting at the edge of the bed, shoes on, hair combed with the palm of his hand. Jameson helped him with his coat and didn't ask how he'd gotten himself dressed in silence. They drove across town in silence. The hospital was small, older, the kind of place built before efficiency was a concept. The nurse at the front desk didn't question Jameson's name when he gave it. She just nodded, pulled up the chart and said, "Room 203. She's lucid, but tired." Eli walked ahead of him down the hallway, past the vending machines and faded flyers for grief groups and blood drives. He stopped at the door and looked up at Jameson. "Do I knock?" Jameson shook his head. "It's your mom." Inside, the room was quiet. The blinds were open, the light spilling across a thin blanket. Melissa lay curled slightly on her side, her skin pale, her hair pulled back in a braid. She looked smaller than Jameson remembered, smaller than anyone should be. Eli crossed the room and took her hand. She stirred, smiled. "You made it," she whispered. Eli nodded. Jameson stood just inside the doorway, frozen. Melissa's eyes met his. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "Hey, Jamie." He swallowed. "Hey, Mel." "You got taller." He huffed a breath. "You got smaller." She smiled, tired. "Lungs don't work like they used to." He stepped closer, looked at the chart. Oxygen levels, pain management, DNR form. "You should have called me sooner." "You would have said no." "You don't know that." "Yes," she said. "I do." They stared at each other. Melissa reached out with one hand. Her fingers trembled. "He's a good kid." "I can see that. I didn't do everything right." "You got him here?" Her eyes watered. "I didn't want him to go into the system. I didn't want him to disappear." "He won't. I need you to promise." Jameson looked at Eli. The boy had sat down beside the bed, clutching her hand with one and holding a small beat-up action figure in the other. "I promise," Jameson said. Melissa exhaled. "Thank you." They stayed for hours. Jameson helped her sit up. He brought water. He ordered food that she barely touched. Eli didn't leave her side. At one point, she dozed off, and Jameson stepped out into the hallway. He called Claire. "I need the number for a family court liaison," he said, "and someone who knows how to fast-track guardianship paperwork. Are you sure?" He looked through the door's window at Eli, now tucking the blanket higher up around his mother's shoulders. "I'm sure," he said. "I'm not letting him go." Claire didn't argue. Jameson stood in that hallway as the sun climbed higher, as the world turned as if it didn't know what was happening in room 203, and felt something old in him break open, something he thought he'd buried with the case files and the anger and the name Melissa Ray. He didn't know what the next few days would bring, but he knew this. He was no longer a man with nothing left to hold on to. He had Eli now, and he wouldn't let go. Melissa woke again just before noon, her breathing shallow but steady, a faint wheeze in every exhale like wind through a crack in a window. Her eyes fluttered open to find Eli sitting at her side with his hand still wrapped gently around hers, and Jameson in the corner chair, tie loosened, sleeves rolled, his coat folded neatly on the back of the chair. He'd been watching her sleep, the way her chest barely lifted, the pale stretch of her skin across her knuckles, how she clung to her son's presence like it tethered her to the world. "You stayed," she said softly. Jameson nodded. "Of course I did. I wasn't sure if you would. I wasn't sure I wouldn't." She smiled at that, tired and lopsided. "Still got that lawyer mouth on you." Eli turned toward her. "Mom?" "Yeah, baby?" "You're going to be okay, right?" Her face didn't change. She didn't rush to comfort, didn't lie. She reached her hand up to touch his cheek, brushing her thumb across a smudge of chocolate he'd gotten from the cocoa that morning. "You're going to be okay," she said. "That's the part I know." Eli frowned. "But what about you?" She paused for a long time. "I'm tired, Eli. My body's tired. But I've been tired before, and I always had one reason to keep going." He looked down. "Me?" She nodded. "Always you." The room was quiet except for the soft buzz of the oxygen machine, the faint tap of a nurse's shoes down the hallway. Jameson stood and walked over to the bed, pulling up the second chair, placing it beside Eli's. Melissa looked at him, really looked, her eyes tracing his face like she was searching for someone she hadn't seen in a long time. "You look older," she said. "Feel older," he replied. "You look like you've been fighting hell." "I have, and I do it again. But I'm running out of fight." Jameson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the folded letter. "Why me?" Melissa's eyes didn't waver. "Because you were the only person I knew who'd show up, who wouldn't say, 'That's not my responsibility,' who wouldn't call the state and wash their hands of it." "I'm a lawyer," he said. "I'm trained to follow protocol." You're also the kid who once sat in the back of the grocery store with me for 2 hours while I cried about my mom going to rehab. You're the kid who shared your lunch every damn day in 5th grade because you knew I didn't have one. You're the man who sent me flowers after I bombed my GED the first time." Jameson blinked, the memories flooding in like cold water. "I knew," she continued, "that no matter how much time passed, if I needed you, you'd come." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything. He reached over and placed his hand on Eli's back. "He's not going into the system," Jameson said. "I'm filing for emergency guardianship today. You'll have to sign, but I've already got the paperwork started." Melissa looked at him, eyes wide with something that resembled peace. "You're really doing this? I'm really doing this?" Her eyes welled. "He's going to need someone patient, someone who won't get mad when he shuts down. He doesn't like loud voices. He won't say when he's hungry, but he is a lot. He'll act like he doesn't care about school, but he does. He's sensitive, Jameson. He's got a heart like a cracked window. He lets everything in, even when he shouldn't." Jameson nodded. "I'll learn. Whatever it takes. I'll learn." Melissa exhaled. It sounded like something giving way after holding too long. "I didn't want to die scared," she whispered. "Now I'm not." A nurse came in then, gently interrupting, carrying a clipboard with new vitals and a soft voice asking if Melissa needed anything. She waved her off with a smile. Jameson took Eli to get something from the vending machine while they adjusted her IV, walking the hallway in silence. The boy walked 2 steps behind him, close but not quite within reach. "You hungry?" Jameson asked. Eli shrugged. "A little." Jameson bought 2 granola bars and handed one over. They sat on the bench near the nurse's station, unwrapping the bars, the silence between them something new, not fear, but transition. "You really knew her a long time?" Eli asked finally. "I did." "Was she always like this? Sick, I mean?" "No," Jameson said. "She used to be the strongest person I knew." "She's still strong," Eli said, voice fierce. Jameson nodded. "You're right. She is." They finished their bars in silence. That evening, back at the house, Claire met them at the door with a folder full of printed forms, emergency guardianship paperwork, notarized statements, a list of requirements from the Department of Child and Family Services. Jameson took them without a word, reading through each line like it was gospel. Eli went upstairs to change into pajamas, emerging later with damp hair and a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. "Where do I sleep?" he asked. Jameson pointed. "Anywhere you want. Guest room's made. So is the couch. You can pick." Eli chose the couch, said it felt safer being close to the door. Jameson didn't question it. He just tucked the blanket tighter around the boy's shoulders and sat beside him until the boy's eyes began to close. In the quiet, Jameson picked up Melissa's letter again, rereading the final line. "Please don't let the world teach him to be small. He's not. He's the biggest thing I ever made." Jameson folded it once more. "I won't," he whispered. "I promise." Melissa died 3 days later, just before dawn, with Eli asleep in a chair beside her bed and Jameson in the hallway arguing with a hospital administrator about discharge protocols. By the time he returned to the room, the monitors were still beeping, but the nurses had already begun to disconnect the lines, their movements gentle, automatic. Melissa's eyes were closed, her face slack but peaceful, one hand resting on top of the blanket where Eli had placed his favorite keychain, a little green plastic dinosaur, the night before. Jameson stood in the doorway for a long time, unsure if he was allowed to enter, unsure of what to do now that the thing he'd been bracing for had finally happened. A nurse glanced at him, then stepped aside. "She went quietly," she said, "didn't stir." Eli woke when Jameson laid a hand on his shoulder. He blinked, disoriented, then looked at his mother and froze. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the blanket, his small shoulders rising and falling in silence. Jameson didn't rush him. He just knelt beside him and waited, Later, in the hospital's family room, the social worker arrived, clipboard, badge, soft voice. She didn't recognize Jameson at first, but once she saw the name on the forms, her demeanor changed. "Oh," she said, "you're the guardian." "I am." "We've never had someone complete all the paperwork this quickly." "She asked," he said, "so I moved." They went through the checklist together: temporary placement, medical releases, death certificate processing, funeral decisions. Jameson signed every page without hesitation, and when the social worker offered her condolences and asked if he needed anything, he said yes. "I need to take him home." That night the house was too quiet. Eli refused to eat. He sat on the floor in the living room with his knees pulled to his chest, staring at nothing. Jameson cooked pasta neither of them touched and cleaned the kitchen twice before giving up. Around 10, he brought down a stack of blankets and laid them next to Eli without speaking. Then he sat on the couch, leaned back, and closed his eyes. Somewhere after midnight, he felt a small weight press against his side. Eli had curled up beside him, head against his ribcage, breath shallow but even. Jameson didn't move, didn't sleep. He just rested his hand gently on the boy's back and stayed there until morning. In the weeks that followed, things didn't get easier, but they got quieter. There were calls from extended family, cousins, distant aunts, none of them offering to help, just asking questions and measuring the temperature of Jameson's decision to keep the boy. There were emails from legal offices about the estate, what little there was of it. Bills, medical debt, old eviction notices. Jameson handled them all systematically, like he would a case file. He bought Eli new clothes that fit. He took him to the dentist. He enrolled him in school under his last name. And every day, when the boy came home, Jameson made sure to be there. Not with fanfare, just presence. Sometimes they watched TV, sometimes they sat in silence. Sometimes Eli asked questions about Melissa, what she was like before, what music she liked, whether she really once dyed her hair blue in high school. She did, Jameson said. She said it made her feel electric. One evening, Jameson brought out an old photo album he hadn't touched in years. Inside were pictures from their childhood. Melissa on a swing set, barefoot in a creek, blowing bubbles at a birthday party. Eli stared at each one like it was a window into another life. "She looked so happy," he said. "She was, especially when she was with you." Eli didn't cry, not that night, but he slept better. One morning, after Jameson dropped him off at school, he sat in his car for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had spent his entire adult life climbing, chasing justice, wealth, legacy. He had stood in courtrooms and torn holes through lies, built a reputation on being cold, hard, efficient. But nothing, no case, no verdict, had ever made him feel as certain as walking Eli to the classroom door and hearing him say, "Thanks, Dad." It slipped out, quiet, unthinking. Jameson said nothing at the time, just nodded. But when he got home, he stood in the hallway for 10 minutes before finally letting himself cry. Not from grief, not from guilt, from the terrifying, beautiful fact that Melissa had trusted him. And now her son did too. The days settled into a rhythm that was unfamiliar to Jameson, but grounding in a way he hadn't expected. Morning routines became rituals. The quiet clink of bowls and spoons in the kitchen, the murmur of the radio playing soft classical music while the sun climbed over the city skyline, the sound of Eli's socked feet padding down the stairs precisely 7 minutes after his alarm. They didn't talk much in the mornings, and they didn't need to. Some bonds are built not in words, but in the comfort of repetition. Jameson found himself leaving the office earlier, sometimes even working from home, something that would have been unthinkable only months before. He converted the den into a study where Eli could do homework, outfitting it with shelves of books, beanbags, and a corkboard where Eli could pin whatever he wanted. The first thing he put up was a picture of Melissa, taped at the edges, her smile crooked and radiant. The second was a drawing he had made, two stick figures holding hands with the word "us" scrawled beneath them. Jameson stared at that drawing longer than he meant to the night Eli brought it home. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't planned it, but every day the weight of the responsibility turned more into something else, something warmer, like carrying a child through a storm, not because you were told to, but because the child was yours. Eli had started calling him Dad without fanfare, not every time, sometimes just Jameson. But sometimes, when he was excited about something from school, or when he forgot himself in the middle of a laugh, it came out as naturally as breath. And Jameson never corrected him. They began to fill the house with little things, movie nights with popcorn on the couch, weekend trips to the bookstore, visits to the park where Eli tried earnestly, hopelessly, to teach Jameson how to throw a football properly. Jameson signed him up for piano lessons when he caught Eli tapping keys on an old keyboard Melissa had left behind. The instructor was patient, soft-voiced, and within a few weeks, Eli could play a version of Twinkle Twinkle that made Jameson clap every single time. They didn't talk much about Melissa at first. Eli wasn't ready. But sometimes he'd say things that lingered, like the time they drove past her old apartment and Eli pointed without looking and said, "That's where the rain came in through the window. She put a bowl under it and called it our fountain." Or the time they were walking through the grocery store and he stopped at a particular brand of crackers and whispered, "She used to eat those when her chest hurt, said they calmed her down." Each memory was a stitch, each name a thread. Jameson wrote them down when Eli wasn't looking, filling a notebook he kept in the drawer beside his bed. One day he'd give it to him. Spring came, and with it the court date, the finalization of guardianship. Jameson wore his best suit. Eli wore a tie, slightly crooked, his shirt tucked in with effort. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a soft voice, reviewed the paperwork slowly. "You've taken every step," she said, looking down at the stack of documents. "Why?" Jameson blinked. "Excuse me?" "Why him? You didn't have to. You're not a relative." "There was no obligation." Eli's hand gripped his tightly. Jameson straightened his shoulders. "Because she asked me to. Because she trusted me. And because I looked at him and realized that he didn't need someone perfect. He just needed someone permanent." The judge stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "That's the right answer." She signed the papers. Outside the courthouse, Eli stood staring at the certificate, the official seal pressed into the paper like proof that his life was now real in the eyes of the law. "You know this doesn't change how I see you," Jameson said. Eli looked up. "I was yours the second I opened that letter." Eli said nothing, but he folded the paper carefully, tucked it into his backpack, and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Jameson drove them home in silence, one hand resting on the gearshift, the other brushing lightly against Eli's shoulder every few minutes, just to remind him he was still there. He didn't know what came next. Parenthood wasn't a case to solve or a trial to win. It was a promise renewed every single day. But he knew one thing. He would keep showing up, always, because Melissa had believed in him when she didn't believe in herself. And now Eli did too. Jameson found that love, real love, the kind you didn't plan for, the kind that wasn't dressed in romance or comfort, was quiet. It showed up in the margins, in remembering to buy Eli's favorite toothpaste, in putting an extra granola bar in the backpack because sometimes one wasn't enough, in showing up to a school concert that had no audience because no one else knew what Eli's off-key, halting rendition of a holiday song really meant. It meant courage. It meant growth. It meant healing. By June, Eli had transformed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. His teachers sent home notes about how much he was participating now, how he had started raising his hand, not always with answers, but with ideas. He made a friend named Zeke who came over after school twice a week, They played board games and built Lego cities that took over half the den floor. One day, Jameson stepped over a highway made from couch cushions and found a note on his desk written in red crayon. "Thanks for letting us build a place." He kept the note in his wallet. On the 1-year anniversary of Melissa's death, Jameson didn't know what to do. He made breakfast that morning like always, sat across from Eli, poured cereal, pushed toast toward him. But neither of them ate much. The silence was heavier than usual, full of memory and missing pieces. "You okay?" Jameson asked. Eli nodded. "You?" Jameson folded his hands. "Trying to be." They decided together to visit the cemetery. Eli packed a bouquet of wildflowers he'd picked from the park. Jameson brought Melissa's old copy of The Velveteen Rabbit, the one with her handwriting in the margins, the one she used to read to Eli during the nights when she could still breathe without effort. At the grave, Eli laid down the flowers. Jameson read aloud from the book, his voice catching more than once. But he finished it. When they stood to leave, Eli looked at the stone, then at the sky. "She'd like it here today," he said. "Yeah," Jameson whispered. "She would." That night, Eli fell asleep on the couch, watching cartoons. Jameson let him stay there, covered him with a blanket, turned down the lights, and sat nearby with his laptop open, finishing an article he'd promised, a law journal. The piece wasn't about criminal defense. It wasn't about legal precedent. It was about guardianship, about trust, about the ways the law could be both a shield and a scalpel, about how sometimes the best legal decision wasn't the one written in statute, but the one written in a child's eyes when they found someone who stayed. He titled the article, "The Letter." At the end, he quoted Melissa, "He's the biggest thing I ever made. Please don't let the world teach him to be small." The journal published it without edits. It was shared widely, law schools, courtrooms, family rights organizations. Some judges wrote him personal notes. One said she kept the quote above her desk now. Another said she cried in her chambers after reading it, then went home and told her daughter she loved her 3 times. But Jameson didn't care about the attention. He cared that Eli smiled more now, that he asked questions, that he called their house home without thinking about it. They adopted routines. Tuesdays were spaghetti night. Thursdays were library runs. Sundays were slow mornings with music, crossword puzzles, and waffles they never quite perfected. One Saturday, Jameson came downstairs to find Eli at the table working through a family tree project for school. He had drawn Jameson at the base, not Melissa. "You sure you want to start with me?" Jameson asked gently. Eli nodded. "You're the roots. She's the wind." Jameson couldn't speak for a minute. Then he sat down, took the pencil from Eli's hand, and helped him draw the branches. Together. That summer, they took a trip to the coast, just the 2 of them. They rented a small cabin near the water. Eli collected shells. Jameson tried not to burn the eggs every morning. They watched the stars at night, lying side by side on the porch, naming constellations wrong on purpose. "This is the dragon," Eli said, pointing. "Looks like a spoon to me." "That's his tail." "What's this one?" "The dinosaur Mom put in her purse when I was 3. Jameson smiled. "Definitely looks like him." They didn't need more than that. No grand adventures, no perfect pictures, just the quiet knowledge that they had become something permanent, something whole. In late August, as the first winds of fall began to stretch across the city, Jameson found himself standing in the back of Eli's classroom during open house night, surrounded by bulletin boards filled with colored construction paper, hanging art projects, and that distinct scent of pencil shavings and glue. The classroom buzzed with nervous parents and teachers trying to keep order, but Jameson only had eyes for one thing, a poster near the front of the room titled, "What Family Means to Me." Each child had filled in their own blank, some with pictures of houses, others with dogs, stick figures, big dinners. In the center of the poster was Eli's drawing, 2 people standing under a tree, one tall, one small, A speech bubble came from the smaller one that said, "He stayed." Jameson stared at it for longer than he meant to, his throat suddenly tight. The teacher approached him gently, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "He's proud of you, you know," she said. Jameson turned, his voice catching. "He shouldn't have to be." "He knows what it means to be left," she said. "So when someone stays, that's everything." He nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. On the way home, Eli talked about his friends, about how Zeke had a new baby sister and how they were going to build a volcano in science class. Jameson listened, adding little comments, laughing where it fit. When they pulled into the driveway, Eli paused before getting out of the car. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "If Mom were still here, do you think she'd be proud?" Jameson looked at him for a long moment. "I think she already was, from the moment you were born. And I think if she could see you now, she wouldn't be proud. She'd be in awe." Eli didn't respond. He just got out of the car, walked into the house, and quietly began setting the table. Later that night, Jameson found a folded note under his pillow. It was written in blocky pencil, the letters uneven but careful. "Thank you for not letting the world teach me to be small. I love you, Dad." He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window, the note in his hand, the house still and safe around him. Outside, the trees swayed gently, and he imagined Melissa's voice somewhere in the wind, humming the lullaby she used to sing, the one Eli still remembered the tune of, but not the words. He thought about the letter she had sent, the way it had arrived folded and fragile, carried by a boy who didn't yet know how heavy the world could be. He thought about how everything had changed since that day, how he had changed, not all at once, not by magic, but slowly, steadily. With every forgotten lunch he packed in the car and drove to school. With every night he stayed up to soothe a nightmare. With every school project, every piano recital, every scraped knee. He had learned that love wasn't made of grand gestures. It was made of showing up, over and over again, of saying yes when everything in you was afraid, and of saying, "I'm here," and meaning it, and of meaning it again the next day, and the next. Eli had given him something he hadn't known he needed, not a second chance, a first beginning, something new, not because Jameson had been broken and fixed, but because he had been incomplete and didn't even know it. And now, sitting in the house where a boy slept down the hall with a stuffed dinosaur under his pillow and a math test on his desk, Jameson finally understood what Melissa had seen when she'd written those words. "You're the only one I trust to see him and not flinch." And he never had, not once, because Eli had looked at him, arms full of grief and silence and hope, and asked without speaking, "Can I matter here?" And Jameson had answered, "With everything he was, you already do." That September, Jameson started waking up before the alarm clock. Not from stress, not from habit, from something else, something lighter, steadier, a rhythm that had nothing to do with court dates or deposition schedules or the ticking pulse of a high-stakes legal career. Instead, his mornings began with the creak of Eli's bedroom door opening down the hall, the muffled shuffle of socks on hardwood, the half-sung melodies Eli made up to himself as he got dressed. Sometimes Jameson would lie there in bed and just listen to that sound, that simple, extraordinary sound of a boy being a boy, not bracing, not hiding, just existing. It was the music of safety, and Jameson had memorized every note. He made breakfast every morning now, burned toast less often, learned to like black coffee with too much cream because that's how Eli made it when he insisted on trying. There were mornings they ate in silence, and others when Eli talked about science class or a new word he'd found in a book. Jameson kept a notebook now, too, just for Eli's words, little quotes, passing phrases, things like, "I think my bones get heavier when I'm sad. That's why I walk slower." "I like Tuesdays better because Mondays don't know how to be gentle. When people laugh too fast, I think they're trying not to cry." Each sentence was a window. Jameson began working fewer hours. He handed off cases, restructured his schedule. He started picking Eli up from school most days. Something so simple, so mundane, yet every time he saw Eli waiting at the curb, backpack slung over one shoulder, face brightening when he spotted Jameson's car, it felt like a victory. Not a win in court, a win in life. A win Melissa had trusted him to chase on her behalf. They visited her grave every Sunday. Sometimes they brought flowers. Sometimes Eli brought drawings. One week he brought a sealed envelope. Jameson asked what it was. "It's my letter," Eli said, "like hers." Jameson didn't read it, just watched as Eli placed it on the headstone, smoothed it flat, and whispered, "I got him too." Afterward, they went for ice cream, sat on the curb outside the same old shop Melissa had once worked at as a teenager. Jameson told Eli stories, not court stories, not cases, Melissa stories, about how she once got detention for hiding a stray cat in her locker, about how she used to sing in the car even when the windows were down. "She said you were always the smart one," Eli said. Jameson chuckled. "She was lying. She said you were kind too." Jameson blinked. "That part might have been true, but not always." "Well, you are now." That night, after Eli had gone to bed, Jameson stood at the kitchen sink staring out at the yard, the porch light casting soft halos on the overgrown grass. And he cried, not out of sadness, out of the overwhelming, soul-shaking truth that this life he was living wasn't an accident, it wasn't charity, it wasn't a favor to an old friend or a burden he had agreed to out of guilt. It was a gift. Melissa had left him a letter, but Eli had written him a life. There were hard days, of course there were, days when Eli refused to talk, when he came home withdrawn, when he had nightmares so vivid he woke screaming, and Jameson had to sit with him for hours just rocking him silently in the hallway, like a metronome keeping time with a heart that didn't know how to feel safe yet. There were parent-teacher conferences where well-meaning educators tiptoed around words like trauma and behavioral delay. There were awkward social situations, questions from strangers, judgments dressed as curiosity. But Jameson never wavered, because every hard day was still a day with Eli, and Melissa had trusted him to keep showing up. One weekend they went to the coast, not far, just a 2-hour drive. They stayed in a small cabin with squeaky floorboards and mismatched curtains. On the second night there was a storm. The wind howled. The power flickered. And Eli, instead of panicking, instead of curling into himself like he used to, reached out in the dark and found Jameson's hand. "I think she's here," he said. Jameson squeezed his hand. "I think she always is." The next morning, the storm was gone, and Eli smiled like he had all the sun he'd ever need. In October, the leaves began to fall, slow and golden, the way they did when the world wanted you to notice the passing of time without hurrying through it. Jameson and Eli spent Saturdays raking the backyard, not because it needed to be done, but because Eli liked the rhythm of it, the sound of the rake scraping gently through the grass. They made piles so high that Eli could disappear in them, popping up with a shout just to make Jameson laugh. The house was full of those small, ordinary moments now, the kind that didn't ask for attention but left a mark just the same. They framed the photo from the science fair, the one where Eli stood in front of his homemade volcano, hair sticking up on one side, proud grin stretched wide. He hadn't won. That didn't matter. Jameson had watched him speak in front of 30 people, with a calm, steady voice, and then asked to stay and watch the others, clapping for every project, asking questions, even when the adults didn't. That was the win. In the evenings, Jameson read aloud. They worked through every book Melissa had marked in the notebook she left behind. The Little Prince, Charlotte's Web, a tattered copy of Holes with the cover half torn. Some nights, Eli read to him instead, stumbling over longer words, refusing help unless he asked for it himself. One night he finished a whole chapter without pausing, then looked up, breathless and triumphant. "She would have liked that," he said. Jameson couldn't speak for a moment. Then he said, "She would have loved it." They hung a photo of her in the hallway. Nothing formal, just a candid from when she was younger, leaning back in a chair, eyes squinting against the sun, mouth open in a laugh Jameson still heard in dreams. They passed it every day. Sometimes Eli touched the frame. Sometimes he didn't. Both were okay. Jameson started writing again, not legal briefs or op-eds, but essays, reflections. He wrote about Eli, about grief, about love found in places you didn't expect. He didn't publish them, just filled journals, stacked them in the drawer beside the old photo albums. A record, maybe, for Eli someday. A way to say, "I was here, I tried. I loved you the best I could." One morning, Eli came downstairs holding a drawing. It was of their house, the tree in the yard, the two of them sitting on the porch. Above it, he'd written, "My real family showed up late, but they stayed." Jameson framed that one too. In early November, the school counselor called. Nothing urgent. She just wanted to share a moment. Eli had been asked to write an essay on someone he admired. He wrote about Jameson. He said, "You're the kind of person who doesn't quit just because it's hard," she said. Jameson had to sit down. Thanksgiving came, just the two of them. Jameson cooked badly. Eli laughed at the lumpy mashed potatoes. They burned the rolls, ate too much pie, fell asleep on the couch halfway through a movie. It wasn't perfect. It was home. And Jameson understood finally what Melissa had meant when she wrote that last line. Please don't let the world teach him to be small. He wouldn't. He hadn't. Because Eli was becoming something more every day. Bigger in heart, louder in joy, stronger in self. And Jameson, once so sure he had nothing left to give, was finding himself remade in the shape of fatherhood, of presence, of love that didn't ask to be earned, just love that showed up, again and again, and stayed. In the early days of December, as frost began to lace the corners of the windows and Eli counted down the days to winter break, with a paper chain he'd taped across the kitchen cabinets, Jameson found himself lingering in the hallway more often than not, pausing by door frames, hands in his pockets, watching Eli doodle with his tongue between his teeth, watching him explain how clouds were made, even if he got the science wrong, watching him grow into his own skin one ordinary day at a time. The house, once so quiet it echoed, now pulsed with rhythm, with life. The old floorboards creaked like they were stretching after a long sleep. The kettle whistled every morning at 7. The heater kicked on and off like breath. The living room smelled like cinnamon and crayon wax. The air wasn't just warmer, it was fuller. One evening, after Eli had gone to sleep wrapped in 3 blankets and his stuffed dinosaur tucked under his chin, Jameson sat on the edge of the bed and watched the slow rise and fall of the boy's chest. He remembered that first night, when Eli had shown up with a letter and nothing else. That small figure soaked in rainwater, holding out a piece of paper like it weighed more than his whole body. The boy hadn't cried then, hadn't begged. He just stood there, waiting to see if he mattered. He mattered. Every minute of every day since, he had mattered. Jameson whispered, "Thank you," into the dark. He wasn't sure if it was to Melissa or God or some part of himself that had managed not to flinch when he could have turned away. Maybe all 3. That same week, Jameson attended the winter parent-teacher night, alone, holding a clipboard with sign-up sheets and a coffee that had gone cold. The other parents clustered in pairs, whispering about curriculum and PTA drama, but Jameson didn't care. He stood in front of the table where Eli's writing project was displayed. The assignment had been simple. What makes a family? Eli's page was written in pencil. A family isn't who you're born with. A family is who shows up when it matters. A family doesn't have to look like anything except safe. Mine came late, but he brought pancakes. Jameson didn't realize he was crying until a hand brushed his arm. Eli's teacher. "He's the kindest boy I've ever met," she said, "and the bravest." Jameson couldn't speak. He just folded the paper gently, slipped it into his coat pocket, and walked back to the car under a sky full of stars he hadn't noticed in years. A few days later, the snow came. Not in flurries, thick and fast, piling against the windows, turning everything white and still. Eli rushed outside in boots 2 sizes too big, throwing himself into snowbanks, laughing until his cheeks turned red. Jameson followed behind with a thermos of cocoa, pretending not to wince when Eli nailed him in the face with a snowball. Later, they built a snow fort behind the garage. Eli called it Fort Not Alone. They carved a sign, posted it in the front yard. People stopped to take pictures. On Christmas Eve, Jameson tucked a box under the tree. Inside it was a new coat, warm and waterproof. But more than that, tucked in the inside pocket was a laminated card. A new library card. Eli's name on it, their address, their street. The boy stared at it for a long time before saying anything. "This means I live here forever, right?" Jameson's voice cracked. "Yeah, kid, forever." Eli threw his arms around him without a word. That night, after the presents were opened and the cocoa mugs were empty and the fireplace had burned down to a glow, Jameson sat on the couch with a notebook open in his lap. At the top of the page he wrote, "Year 1. Then he started to list everything that had happened since the letter arrived. 1 trip to the beach, 3 new teachers, 6 boxes of cereal eaten straight from the box, 37 nights of nightmares soothed by sitting in the hallway, 2 I love yous whispered when Eli thought he was asleep, 1 boy who taught a man how to live again." He stopped writing, closed the notebook, and in the silence of the living room he said her name. Melissa. And just let it sit there. He thought of the girl she had been, the mother she became, the way she had folded all her fear into a single envelope and trusted the world would send her son to someone who would care. She had chosen him, and because of that, he had chosen himself, chosen to change, to try, to show up and keep showing up and always, because that's what love is, not perfect, not clean, not without mistakes, just present, every single day. And Eli, he was more than Jameson's responsibility. He was his redemption. And together, they were building something no courtroom could ever define. A home, a future, a life worth holding on to. In January, the world quieted beneath a fresh blanket of snow, the kind that softened the city's hard edges and turned even the busiest streets into slow, careful lanes. School reopened after the holidays, and Eli returned to his routine with a new sense of calm. He had always been a watchful child, careful with his joy, but now he laughed easier, spoke more confidently, raised his hand without hesitation. His teachers saw it. His classmates noticed it. And Jameson, though he never said so aloud, carried it like a secret medal pinned to the inside of his chest. The changes in Eli weren't sudden. They didn't arrive in a burst of clarity or a dramatic breakthrough. They were the kind of changes that came from consistency, from warmth, from the slow miracle of being loved without condition. He no longer asked if Jameson would be at his school play. He assumed he would. He no longer asked if he was staying for dinner. He set the table. When nightmares woke him in the middle of the night, he didn't cry silently into his pillow. He walked down the hall, opened Jameson's door and said, "Can I sleep in here tonight?" And Jameson always said yes. In February, Jameson began teaching Eli how to cook, not just sandwiches or scrambled eggs, but real recipes, chili, lasagna, pancakes from scratch. They ruined at least half the meals. 1 batch of muffins came out so hard they barely bounced when dropped. Eli laughed so hard he spilled flour across the kitchen. They left it there until morning. Jameson didn't mind. It was the kind of mess that meant something. They built a bookshelf together for Eli's room, stained it dark, filled it with paperbacks and graphic novels and photo frames. One frame held a picture from a weekend trip to the mountains. Eli standing on a rock, arms outstretched, wind in his hair, face glowing with that open, unguarded joy that had taken months to return. Another frame held Melissa's photo. A candid Jameson had taken years ago. She was looking down, smiling, unaware the camera had caught her in a rare moment of peace. Eli placed that frame at eye level, right next to his bed. "She can see the books this way," he said. Jameson nodded. "She'd like that." In March, the school held its annual talent show. Eli signed up without telling Jameson. He stood on stage with a small keyboard and played a song he'd written himself. Just a simple melody, no words. But the final notes lingered long after he stepped away from the mic. Jameson stood in the back of the auditorium, hands clasped behind him, heart pounding. He had never been prouder. Later, when he asked about the song, Eli shrugged. "It's called The First Morning." "What's it about?" "The first morning I woke up and didn't feel afraid." Jameson didn't respond. He just hugged him tight and whispered, "That's a good name." In April, they celebrated Eli's birthday, not with a big party, just the two of them, a cake baked from a box, and a scavenger hunt around the house. Each clue was a memory. The couch where Eli had first fallen asleep watching cartoons. The porch swing where they'd read books on warm afternoons. The kitchen drawer where Jameson kept Melissa's letter. The final clue led to a small wrapped box. Inside was a compass, engraved on the back, "For when you're lost," or "when you're just ready to lead." Eli traced the words with his thumb. "This is the best birthday." Jameson smiled. "You're the best gift I ever got." That night, after cake and presents and a long bedtime story, Eli fell asleep with the compass under his pillow. Jameson sat in the hallway for a while, the door slightly ajar, listening to the boy's breathing, remembering all the nights he used to worry he wasn't enough. He wasn't worried anymore, not because he was perfect, because he had stayed. And in staying, he had become something better than perfect. He had become a father. In May, everything began to bloom. The trees along their block filled with green so suddenly it felt like waking up in a new world. And the flowers Eli had planted in the side yard with clumsy hands and oversized gloves burst into wild, uneven color. He named them, every single one. The marigolds were fireheads, the tulips became sleepy mouths, and the single stubborn daisy that had bent sideways to reach the sun was Melissa. He didn't tell Jameson the name at first. But one day, while they were pulling weeds together and Eli was humming something under his breath, he said, "That one's Mom." Jameson paused, brushing dirt from his palms, and looked at the daisy. "She's the strongest," Eli said. "She didn't grow the way they told her to, but she still got there." Jameson swallowed. "She'd like that." He didn't say anything else, just pulled the boy gently into a hug, pressing his dirt-covered fingers against the back of Eli's shirt. By then, the house had fully changed. It was no longer a place where Jameson happened to live. It was a place shaped by Eli's presence. His books on the shelves, his drawings taped to the refrigerator, his shoes always near the door, no matter how many times Jameson asked him to put them away. They had routines now, not just habits, traditions. Eli made Saturday pancakes. Jameson made the Tuesday night pasta. Friday night was movie night, and Eli got to pick, no matter how many times he chose the same animated space adventure. They'd gotten better at the hard days, too, the days when the memory of Melissa came too suddenly, too sharply, like the time Eli spotted a woman in the grocery store with the same braid his mother used to wear and froze completely, or the night he had a nightmare so fierce he couldn't speak for an hour after waking. Jameson didn't try to fix those moments anymore. He just stayed, sat on the floor, held the silence until Eli was ready to let it go. One weekend, Jameson found Eli sitting on the porch, staring at a blank sheet of paper. "Homework?" he asked. "No, it's for her." Jameson sat beside him. "A letter?" Eli nodded. "But I don't know what to say." "You can say anything." Eli thought for a long time, then said, What if I say I'm okay and she thinks I don't need her? Jameson shook his head. That's not how moms think. She wants you to be okay. Eli's eyes filled. Sometimes I don't remember her voice. I hate that. Jameson reached into his pocket and pulled out a flash drive. This has something for you. I found it last month. I wasn't sure when to show you. He handed it over. Eli ran inside and plugged it into the laptop. There were 3 files. One was a video of Melissa holding infant Eli in her arms, rocking him back and forth, singing softly under her breath. The second was a message she'd recorded for him before she got too sick to speak clearly. Just a few sentences. How proud she was, how much she loved him, how she knew he'd find his way, even if she couldn't stay. The third was a lullaby, one Jameson had forgotten, until he heard it again, her voice unsteady but sweet. Eli sat there frozen. Then he began to cry, not with panic or fear, but with something softer, something full. I remember, he whispered. Jameson knelt beside him, pulling him close. They sat there, arms around each other, while Melissa's voice filled the room one more time. From that day forward, Eli kept the flash drive on his nightstand, not because he needed to play it every day, but because it was hers, because it was real, because she had said goodbye in her own way. And now he could say hello again, whenever he wanted. School ended in June. Eli passed every class. His math teacher said he was the most focused student she'd ever had. His music teacher wrote a note that read, "There is a steadiness in him now. He trusts the world a little more each day." Jameson kept that note. They didn't go on a big vacation that summer. They didn't need to. They went to the lake on Sundays. They planted a second row of flowers. They built a birdhouse together, though neither of them could figure out how to keep it straight. Eli made a sign and hung it sideways anyway. The birds came. Because it turns out love doesn't need to be symmetrical. It just needs to be present, constant, and true. Understood. Here's a significantly longer continuation of the story, maintaining the tone and format you've asked for. July came heavy with heat and long stretches of sky so blue it seemed unreal, like something painted, a memory from childhood you could almost remember but never quite explain. Jameson and Eli adjusted to the summer hours slowly, like the world was inviting them to breathe differently. The school alarms and structured lunches were replaced with quiet mornings, bare feet, popsicles on the porch. They didn't travel anywhere far. They didn't need to. The days themselves felt like motion. In the early weeks of the month, Jameson rearranged his caseload so he could work 3 days a week from home. He set up his laptop at the kitchen table, earbuds in, files spread across manila folders like the old days. But now his view was different. Eli on the living room floor piecing together a model airplane, humming under his breath, his feet kicking softly as he concentrated. At noon, Jameson made sandwiches, and they ate together without ceremony. No forced conversation, just the easy rhythm of people who no longer needed to fill silence to feel seen. It had been nearly a year since the letter. A year since Eli had walked into Jameson's life with nothing but a backpack and a folded piece of paper that had changed everything. Sometimes Jameson still woke in the night with the weight of it all on his chest. Not regret, not fear, just the quiet magnitude of knowing what could have been lost if he'd chosen differently. If he'd said no. If he'd let the system take over. If he'd let grief and busyness and boundaries keep him from recognizing the boy for what he was, a miracle, a second chance, a life waiting to be protected. Eli, for his part, had changed too, not just in the obvious ways. He was taller, yes, his voice deeper. He slept through the night now, most nights. He didn't flinch when the phone rang. He asked questions he never would have dared before, about Melissa, about Jameson's work, about what it meant to grow up and still carry someone with you every day. One afternoon, while helping Jameson fold laundry, Eli held up a shirt and said, "Do you think she'd recognize me now?" Jameson didn't answer right away. He took the shirt gently, folded it, placed it on the stack, and then said, "She'd recognize you anywhere. That's what moms do." Later that evening, they lit sparklers in the backyard. Eli twirled his through the air, spelling his name, drawing shapes, laughing when the sparks hissed too close to his shoes. Jameson watched from the porch steps, sipping a glass of water, letting the boy's joy soak into him like sun. "I think she'd like this," Eli said, waving his sparkler in big, looping circles. "I think she'd love it." "Do you think she's still watching?" "I think she never stopped." Eli smiled at that, and for a moment the air around them stilled, like the world had paused, nodded, and moved forward again. They kept that rhythm going through the month. Mornings began with Eli reading on the couch, legs stretched across Jameson's lap, book cracked open, head tilted. Afternoons brought bike rides to the park, grocery store trips where Eli insisted on pushing the cart, evenings filled with cooking experiments that mostly ended in laughter and messy counters. Jameson taught him how to make grilled cheese without burning it. Eli taught Jameson how to let go of a bad day before bedtime. They planted more flowers in the yard, added wind chimes to the front porch, painted the fence with old brushes and leftover house paint in uneven stripes of green and blue. When a neighbor commented that it looked like a child's artwork, Eli said, "That's because it is." And Jameson beamed with pride. By mid-July, Jameson realized he hadn't thought about work during dinner in weeks. He hadn't opened his laptop past 6 p.m. He hadn't missed the version of himself that used to chase success like it was something that might vanish if he stopped moving. He had built a life around presence, not performance. He was still a lawyer. He still fought for clients, still showed up to court in clean suits, and made judges lean forward when he spoke. But it wasn't everything now. It wasn't the center of him. Eli was. And in quieter ways, Melissa still was too. Her letter was still in the drawer. Her photo still hung in the hallway. Her laugh, captured in a single grainy voicemail Jameson couldn't bear to delete, played sometimes when he needed grounding. He didn't talk about her every day. Neither did Eli. But she lived in the way the boy walked, the way he noticed things, the way he paused before he answered questions, always considering the weight of his words. One night, Eli crawled into Jameson's bed long after midnight, eyes still wet from a dream. "Bad one?" Jameson asked, shifting to make room. Eli nodded, curling close. "She left." "In the dream?" "Yeah, she left and I was small again, and I didn't know who to find." Jameson wrapped his arm around the boy's shoulders. "She didn't leave you, Eli. She found me." Eli was quiet for a long time. Then he whispered, "Promise you'll stay." Jameson pulled him tighter. "Always." Outside, a summer storm rolled in. Thunder low and steady in the distance, lightning flickering behind the clouds. Inside, in the dim light of a bedside lamp, Jameson held the boy he had chosen. The boy who had chosen him back. And they listened to the rain. Not afraid, not alone, just safe, just home, just together. And neither of them ever needed to ask again. August arrived with a gentle slowness, the days long and warm, heavy with golden light that soaked into the sidewalks and stretched the afternoons past bedtime. Jameson had never paid attention to seasons before, not really. His life used to be measured in quarters and closings, in court calendars and fiscal deadlines. But now he noticed the way the sun hit the kitchen table at 6:42 p.m., casting soft stripes through the blinds where Eli's newest drawing would sit, anchored under a glass of half-finished lemonade. He noticed the crickets coming earlier in the evening, the cooler breeze sliding in through the windows just after dusk. The house was alive in ways he hadn't thought possible, not just with motion, but with meaning. The fridge was cluttered with Eli's artwork, school reminders, and small notes they left each other, Post-its with crooked hearts, grocery requests, inside jokes. There was a whiteboard calendar by the back door, and Eli had started writing affirmations on it. Today will be kind. We don't have to be fast, just brave. Mistakes are allowed here. Jameson read them every morning before leaving for the office. On some days, they steadied him more than any legal strategy ever had. The weekends became sacred. Saturdays were for pancakes, which Eli had perfected with a secret ingredient Jameson still didn't know. Sundays were for long walks through the park, where they picked out new trees to name after constellations and traced cloud shapes with their fingers like cartographers of the sky. Every so often they would visit Melissa's grave, never with fanfare, never with sadness. Just a quiet acknowledgement, a presence. Eli would talk to her like she was sitting beside them. Jameson didn't always hear the words, but he stayed close, grounding each moment with the steady, wordless promise that they were still here, still whole. That month, Eli's school sent home a letter about the fall curriculum. There was a section on family history, an assignment where students were expected to bring in stories, photos, or artifacts from their past. Jameson found Eli sitting at the kitchen table, frowning down at the paper. "You okay?" he asked. Eli shrugged. "I don't have much to bring. Everyone else has like 5 generations. All I have is—" He stopped. Jameson sat down. "What you have is real. It's yours. But it's not full." Jameson reached for the old box he'd been keeping in the closet. Melissa's letters, photos, documents. They opened it together that night, spreading everything across the living room floor like a tapestry. There were pictures of Melissa as a teenager, of her holding baby Eli, of her wearing mismatched socks and dancing in the kitchen with a plastic spoon. There was a hospital bracelet, Eli's birth certificate, a single earring she'd once worn with everything because she said it made her feel a little dangerous. Eli touched each item like it was treasure. "She was so cool," he said. "She still is," Jameson replied. They built a collage together for his school project, part history, part memory, part dream. Eli titled it, "The Family I Carry." His classmates loved it. His teacher cried. When Jameson picked him up that day, Eli ran to the car holding the presentation board above his head like a trophy. That night, they celebrated with takeout and a movie. Jameson fell asleep halfway through, but Eli let him stay slumped on the couch, covering him with a blanket, before tiptoeing upstairs. As the days rolled toward the start of school, they did the usual preparations, shopping for supplies, picking out notebooks, trying on sneakers in fluorescent aisles. But it wasn't like the year before. This time, there was no uncertainty, no edge. Eli was ready. He was excited. He'd begun to invite friends over, to speak up in class, to volunteer to go first. One afternoon, Jameson found a crumpled scrap of paper in Eli's backpack. It was a poem. "I used to be small, like a whisper, but now I'm a song in the sky. I still remember the silence, but now I remember how to fly." Jameson didn't say anything when he read it. He just folded it, slipped it into his wallet behind the photograph of Eli at the science fair, and held it there like a prayer. Because the truth was, Eli had become something more than Jameson ever imagined. He was proof that grief could become growth, that absence could be transformed into presence, that a letter left in the hands of a little boy could rewrite the life of a man who thought he was already finished with change. And as August slipped toward September, Jameson stood in the yard one evening, watching Eli chase fireflies barefoot through the grass, his laughter bright as the stars overhead, and whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Melissa." Because in choosing to trust him, she had not only saved her son, she had saved Jameson too. September arrived not with the crisp coolness Jameson remembered from his childhood, but with a slow shift in the air, an undercurrent of change that made the mornings quieter and the evenings longer. Eli was starting his second year at his new school. Jameson had packed his lunch the night before: turkey sandwich, pretzels, carrot sticks, a juice box, and a note folded neatly in the lid that said, "You are the bravest person I know, Dad." Eli hadn't said anything when he saw it. He just folded it and slid it into his pocket. Jameson watched him walk into the building from the car, backpack bouncing lightly on his shoulders, head held high. No hesitation. No looking back. And for a moment Jameson just sat there behind the wheel, blinking away the sting in his eyes, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of it all, that the same boy who had once arrived at his office soaked in rain, clutching a letter like a lifeline, was now someone who walked into the world like he had every right to be there. That afternoon, Jameson left work early. Not for anything urgent. He just wanted to be home when Eli walked through the door. He brewed tea, sat by the window, and waited. And when the door finally creaked open and Eli stepped inside, flushed from the walk, his voice was light. "I think I'm going to try out for the school play." Jameson blinked. "Really?" "Yeah, not for a big part, just something." Jameson stood, crossed the room, and ruffled his hair gently. "You don't have to be the lead, Eli. Just being brave enough to show up is everything." Eli grinned. "That's what she used to say, too." They didn't need to say her name. Melissa was there, always was. In the way Eli smiled, in the way he walked into silence without fear, in the way Jameson had learned to listen better because of her. She wasn't gone. She had simply stepped back so that her son could take the stage. In the following weeks, they settled into their school year rhythm again. Mornings were a dance of socks and cereal and rushing out the door with just enough time to beat the traffic. Evenings were quieter, homework at the kitchen table, music drifting from Eli's room, leftovers reheated with care. On Fridays, they built blanket forts in the living room and watched movies from beneath the soft folds of cotton and laughter. Jameson had rearranged his office hours, told his clients that he would no longer be available after 5:30 p.m., and meant it. Some didn't understand. Others admired it. He didn't explain. Because how could he explain that the most important case he'd ever taken wasn't filed in any courtroom? That it had arrived in silence, delivered by a child too small for the chair he'd sat in, carrying nothing but a name and a plea and a love so fierce it had outlived death. He'd stopped trying to measure success in verdicts. Now he measured it in small things, the way Eli laughed with his whole chest, the day he volunteered to help another kid with math, the time he came home with a scraped knee and said, "I didn't cry because I knew I could tell you about it." There was a new stillness in Jameson now, not the absence of feeling, the presence of peace. One night in late September, Eli came into the living room holding a photo of Melissa. "Do you think she's proud of me?" he asked. Jameson didn't hesitate. "Yes." "How do you know?" "Because I knew her, and because I know you, and because what you're doing, growing up, staying kind, being strong, that's everything she ever wanted for you." Eli sat beside him, silent for a moment. Then he leaned his head against Jameson's shoulder. "I'm glad she picked you." Jameson swallowed hard. "So am I." And there, in the golden hush of a house that had once been filled with grief, a father and son sat together, not needing anything more than the truth that had carried them this far. Love, when chosen, changes everything. And they weren't going back.